All right, good evening, Wednesday evening, February the 5th, and I want to welcome everybody to the live learning session. Tonight we're going to finish ELA, elasticity, and we're going to get into the cost curves, all the cost curves that go into play in this course. So I do want to remind everybody that if you, in addition to these live learning sessions, the other thing you can do, if you go to the section there, rats. I forgot what they even call it, but anyways, it's student resources or whatever it is in the main thing. I've looked it up in a little bit. It's got all my notes there. You can follow along with what I'm doing in those notes there. It's got links to videos you can watch. I've talked about Jacob Clifford, Jacob Reed, Jason Welker, Khan Academy, and of course the College Board has their videos out. So any topic that you're struggling over, I strongly suggest you go through my notes, look at that information there, watch the videos, and of course you can always email me for help, and I'll be glad to even get together with you one-on-one on a Zoom session to help you out if you're struggling over a concept. So anyways, so let's get started tonight. Got a lot I want to do, and here we go. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video, as I say every week, just to preserve your bandwidth. I always turn off the videos. There we go, and let me share. Okay, so last week I went through all about elasticity and what elasticity is, how to calculate it. We did elasticity of demand. Okay, and so first of all, let me back up. The basic formula for elasticity is, let's do elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand is, my pen just broke, is the percent change in quantity, and since elasticity of demand, there's percent change in quantity demanded, divided by the percent change in price. Okay, that's the basic formula. If you know that formula, then you're golden for the other four formulas, okay? Because the other three formulas, elasticity supply is the exact same thing, but this, instead of this being quantity demanded, this is quantity supplied. Now you've got that formula. Cross price elasticity, one where you're trying to figure out where it's substitutes or complements. This is going to be the price of X and the quantity of, say, Z. So again, the exact same formula, it's just doing with two different formulas, or two different products. And then the last one is income elasticity. Income elasticity, elasticity income, is the percent change in quantity over the percent change in income. And that, you know that because the income elasticity. So once you've done one formula, you've got all four of them. So you're good to go there. I went through last week and I showed you exactly how to calculate it, and we practiced it. We found out some important things. Okay, I'm going to flip back to it to show it to you. We found out that when you've got a downward sloping demand curve, moving back to it here still, it's pretty far back here. We got a downward sloping demand curve. That's pretty muddled up here. Okay, there we go. We got a downward sloping demand curve. The upper left part of it is always elastic. The lower right-hand part of it is always inelastic. And when you hit that midpoint there, that midpoint of the demand curve is unitary. We found out that's really, really important because it's also where marginal revenue is zero. And then we found out that since that's where marginal revenue is zero, that's also where total revenue is maximized. And I told you that I looked at one test one year, and knowing this combination of graphs with all the information it gives you that I just showed you helped answer or eliminate answers for 7 of the 60 questions in the multiple choice. So you really want to be aware of these two graphs here and understand what they're telling you. And they're going to come back to haunt us later on when we get to monopoly and monopolistic competition. So if you don't get them now, they're going to get you in that unit. Okay, so learn them now as much as you can so you'll be good to go there. So moving forward. All right, so what I got up to last week is I got up to taxes. And taxes is the standard the College Board has, the EK. It says governments use taxes and subsidies to change incentives in ways that influence consumer and producer behavior, shifting the supply and demand curves. Okay, we don't in this course do a whole lot where we're adjusting producer behavior necessarily, okay, or necessarily manipulating consumer behavior. This will come into play in the last unit when we talk about something called externalities in here. But for the most part, what you 98, 99% of the questions, whenever they mention taxes, you're shifting the supply curve. Okay. Whenever they mention subsidies, you're shifting the supply curve. In order to shift the actual demand curve, the demand for the product, they're going to have to say something in the question about a tax directed at consumers. It's going to have to be very, very, very obvious that this is a tax directed at consumers. And in reality, there aren't really any like that. We have some that we call like usage taxes, like gasoline is supposed to be a usage tax. Only the people that pay it are the ones that are using gasoline. But even those, they affect the supply curve, not the demand curve. Okay. And so we're not going to worry about that. That's going to come into play a little bit later on in the course, but I wanted to go ahead and hit that with you right now so that you will be thinking about that throughout the course. All right. Then what I did was I came in here and I said, okay, let's assume we've got this product. We're sitting here at this red dot, which is the equilibrium of supply and demand. Notice drawing these guys, a couple of things, upward slope in supply, downward slope in demand. And then you've got these dots. The only dots that you have, these dotted lines, are the ones that go to show the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. And notice all my quantities and prices are labeled outside of the axes. I'm starting to see some people making the usual mistakes, things that I normally see with you guys that are learning. And I see a student that'll do like this. They'll label the quantity in there. That is wrong, unacceptable. They won't accept it on the AP exam, and I won't accept it. I'm seeing people that are shifting curves, and when they go to, like, example, let's suppose they're going to draw a new demand curve. Okay, you got quantity, you got price, you got a downward slope of demand. Let's suppose we want to do an increase in demand. I'm seeing students do something like this. Dotted lines for curves are never acceptable. I know I've said that probably the last 2 or 3 learning sessions, but just in case you missed it when I said it there, I wanted to say it again. They are never acceptable. They're not going to be acceptable in the AP exam. And again, since they're not acceptable in the AP exam there, I'm not going to accept them either. It has to be a solid line. So that would be an acceptable increase in demand. And really, if you want to really do overkill, do a little arrow like that, showing which way you shifted it. But that's not necessarily vital. I'm not going to take off if you don't do that. So, right. So what we've done here is we've got this problem, and we're going to put a tax on it. So the equilibrium price before the tax is $12. Equilibrium quantity before the tax is 100 units. So we buy 12 units at 100 units at $12 a piece. That means that the seller is bringing in $12 at $100 a piece. So their total revenue, which is the price times the quantity, is 12 times 100, which is equal to $1,200. So they're bringing $1,200 total revenue into their cash register. Now, what we don't know if that's elastic or inelastic or anything like that, because we have to actually move along the curve to find out where we are. Are we at the unitary point? I don't know. It kind of looks like it, but that just could be the way we do it. You can never, without actual data, without actual numbers, you can't say for sure whether you're elastic, inelastic, or unitary, unless I came in and said this. If I came in and told you this, there's a marginal revenue curve. Now that tells us that this, I'll do it in blue. This blue dot right here is the unitary point, which means that we would be elastic right now. Okay, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to try to calculate elasticity coefficients and do a percent change in price and quantity. We've got a quantity price of 12 and a quantity of 100. I guess we could go back to 80 and try to figure it out. But even then, that's not accurate, because what if you get, maybe unitary right in this range right here. So anyways, I just want to point that out, because sometimes students, they're thinking about what they just learned and they want to apply it to what they're just about to learn. And sometimes it doesn't really work that way. You can't really apply forward or backwards. A lot of times it does. But so what's going to happen now is we're going to put a $2 tax on this product. A $2 taxes are always measured vertically. Okay. In other words, what's going to happen is that the red dot's here at 12. And what we're going to do is we're going to shift this curve this way by $2. So we're going to go straight up and down by $2. So that means every point along this guy has got to go up by $2. But except for the fact that the supply curve is upward sloping, it's not horizontal, it's not vertical, it's upward sloping. So what happens is this is $12 right here, and when we go up $2, we're actually going to where this point is 14. And right here, this one was at $11. So when we go up $2, we then go to 13. And so every point on that green line is $2 higher than the point on the original supply curve. Okay, and that's a key point that a lot of students screw up. They mess it up because they don't realize that they try to shift it, and they immediately assume that just they'll read the problem real quick and they won't stop and think, and they'll say, okay, if the price was $12 and we put a $2 tax on it, that means the new price is 14. No, 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 no. The new price is not going to be 14 because you didn't shift straight. You didn't jump up to 14. Okay. What happens here is that the new price, if you read the graph, I'm trying to draw it in here. Okay. If you read the graph, the price was 12. And then when it shifted up that demand curve, the price is now 13. So the price went from 12 to 13. The quantity decreased from 100 to 80. And students say, well, how can that be? If you put a $2 tax on it, why didn't the price go up $2? Well, the price didn't go up $2. It's called tax incidence. Who's actually paying the tax? And here, because I've drawn these nice 45-degree lines, it looks like the tax is going to be split 50-50. We're going to pay $1 of the tax as consumers, and the seller is going to pay $1 of the tax. I'll show it to you on here. And I know I did this last week, but I always do this twice with my in-person class too, because it's hard to understand. And second time you kind of get a little bit better. So if you watched last week, you're going, hey, he just did this. Yes. If you got it last time, then great. You're in the top probably 5 or 10% of students, because most students, it takes 2 chances to get this down. So prior to the tax, $12, 100 units. After the tax, $13, 80 units. So the question is, how much did it cost us consumers per unit? Well, before we were paying 12, now we're paying 13. So our share of the tax is the 13 minus the 12 times, we're buying 80 units, times 80. So our tax is 13 minus 12 times 100 minus 80. No, it's not. Times 80, because we're buying 80 units. I was doing a different formula. So it's 13 minus 12 times 80. So we're paying $80 in taxes. $1 per unit, because the price was 12, now it's 13, and we're buying 80 units. Right? Why aren't we buying 100? Well, we're not buying 100 because that's off of our demand curve. At a price of 13, we're not willing and able to buy 100. Right? We're like, hey, price went up. I don't want to buy as much of this anymore, right? Okay, so that one's the easy one. The hard one is the producer. The producer, prior to the tax, they were charging $12 and they were getting $12. They were happy. They're getting their $12. Now they're charging 13, but they have to turn around and send the government $2. So when they send the government $2, they're only going to keep, if you look at the graph again, they're only going to keep $11. So before the tax, they're able to keep 12. Now they're able to keep 11. So their share of the tax is the 12 minus 11. And they're selling 80 units, so they have to pay $80 in taxes. And so that's their share. So the red is the producer. The producer's share of the tax. And the blue is the consumer share of the tax. And then, of course, we're no longer at that red dot, which is where we want to be. Instead, we're at the blue dot. So you get this thing called deadweight loss. So the deadweight loss is a loss of consumer and producer surplus. Okay, we've lost consumer and producer surplus because of the tax. And okay, now without actually having you draw that in here, you don't quite see it unless you draw it like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to erase this over to the right, and I'm going to show you where the consumer surplus was before and where the producer surplus was before. And then I'm going to show you where it is now. In fact, I actually have it drawn here on this one here. So this here, if you look, let me acclimate you real quick here. So this part in green is the tax that the consumer pays. This part in blue is the tax the producer pays. And again, it looks like the consumer's part is bigger, but if you look at the numbers, it's not. It's just because when I drew this, I didn't actually draw it to scale, which again, on the AP exam, you're not going to have graph paper. So yours probably won't be to scale either. That's okay. Okay. Now, obviously, if it's way off and this consumer portion looks, the consumer portion looks like that, and the producer's portion looks like that, and they're supposed to be the same, then that's a little bit of a problem. But if they're close, like I did here on the AP exam, we're good to go because they're testing the economic concept, not your artistic skills. There is one or two things in this course that your artistic skills are very, very important. And when we get to those, I will tell you all about that. I will make a big point about that, how mean and rotten those graders are when it comes to grading that stuff here. So back to this consumer and producer surplus. So prior to the tax, you had an upward slope in supply, a downward slope in demand. The consumer surplus, I'm sorry, I got to write in my prices and quantities. Consumer surplus is everything above price to the demand curve. So that would have been the consumer surplus. Producer surplus would have been everything below price. I'll do it in yellow. Below price to the supply curve. This is the producer surplus. So you can see the big old area of surplus. What happens now when we put the tax in, you can see that this red point right here corresponds with this red point right here. Okay, all we did is the one on the graph on the left is we put this tax in. Notice the consumer surplus is now way up here. So we lost a fair amount. Okay, the producer surplus is just this little area down here. So they lost a fair amount because they're just down here, right? And what ends up happening is the tax actually shifts us to here, right? And that creates this area right here that is completely lost. And that's what we call deadweight loss. Nobody gets it. Nobody gets that money. It disappears because the quantity decreased from 100 to 80. What about the tax itself? Isn't the tax itself lost surplus? Because the idea of deadweight loss is we've lost consumer surplus and we've lost producer surplus. If you look at the tax itself, is that lost surplus? And the answer is no. It is not lost surplus because any money the government collects is spent for society, for consumers and producers. And so it's not lost, it's just redistributed. It comes away from you and me and the sellers, and it goes to the government. It's still in the economy. It's not lost. Where the deadweight loss over here on the right, the black triangle over here on the right, is lost to society. So interesting enough, the total surplus on this graph on the left is actually consumer surplus plus the tax plus the producer surplus. So that yellow triangle is the total surplus, where before the total surplus, before the tax, the total surplus was, let me do it right here, fill it back in when I messed up. The total surplus was, rats, I did it in yellow. We'll have to do a purple over here. That was the total surplus. So you can see that the total surplus is in over here on the graph on the left is lost by the area of the deadweight loss. And that's what makes taxes one of those things that most people don't like. Well, that people don't like to pay it, but that's one of the things from an economist standpoint, taxes are very inefficient because they move us away from the equilibrium point. They move us away from where we want to be, and they restrict how much we can buy. We're getting less, we're paying a higher price, consumer surplus is gone, reduced, producer surplus is reduced. From an economic standpoint, taxes don't really work well. Okay, so this is it drawn here in a different way. You can see, you can look at all this and you can say, okay, this is the new consumer surplus, this is the new producer surplus, this is the deadweight loss. It's hard to draw like that. This is the consumer share of the tax, and this is the producer share of the tax. And you will need to be able to draw this from a blank sheet of paper. The AP exam, it is fair game to have you start off, draw a supply and demand curve, put a tax in it, show the new consumer surplus, show the new producer surplus, show the deadweight loss, maybe show the consumer share of the tax, maybe show the producer share of tax, one or all of those things, probably not all of them, probably one or two of those concepts on one graph. They usually don't make you draw like the whole thing. I know Georgia Virtual does, because we have limited amount of ability to look at your scores. I know you're thinking, no, you guys have like 80 chances to look at our scores, but like in my live classroom, my students would have drawn this graph in various versions of it for me as I'm walking around and looking at them and saying, okay, yeah, that looks good. Not officially grading it, just looking at it and helping them out. So what we have to do with Georgia Virtuals, we have to give it to you like all on one big graph, and you got to show it all type thing, just so that we know whether or not you know it there. So, okay. When you're calculating deadweight loss is always a triangle, and you do have to know the formula for a triangle. It's 1/2 base times height, or base times height divided by 2. Some people do 1/2 base times height. Some people do 1/2 base times height. Some people do base times height divided by 2. Okay, doesn't matter which one you put. You don't actually ever have to write the formula for the AP exam, because it's not an economics formula. If it's an economics formula, you would have to write it. But since this is not an economics formula, you don't have to write it out, but you will have to plug in the numbers to calculate it. So in this case, if I come over to this problem right here, you can actually calculate that area of the deadweight loss here, this black triangle, because I actually give you the numbers. So it's 1/2 base. Always use price as your base. That's a secret there. Always use price as the base, because all of our triangles, the flat part will be the price side. So here it's 1/2 base. So it's 13 minus 11, which is the base. I usually base times height divided by 2. And then 100 minus 80. And for this, unlike elasticity, where it makes a difference which direction you go, whether you go 13 minus 11 or 11 minus 13, when you're doing calculation on a triangle, it doesn't. So anyways, that's the base times height divided by 2. We do that divided by 2. So it'd be 2 times 20 divided by 2, which is 40 divided by 2. So it's 20. So the area of that triangle is 20. So anyways, so you have to be able to do that. All right, moving on. Elasticity. Okay, again, elasticity is percent change in quantity or percent change in price. In English, it's how much do consumers respond to a change in price. And by the way, what we're talking about here is price elasticity. We're not talking about income elasticity, which is how much do consumers respond to a change in income. And we're talking about consumers, so we're actually talking about elasticity of demand. But in general, elasticity of demand is how much consumers respond quantity wise to a change in price of the product, right? And we know that a big change, if the percent change in quantity demanded is big, when the percent change in price, and this is percent change, okay, I should have done that like that, percent change to a so in other words, you can see price just went up this much, but quantity went, whoa, we know that's elastic. They big time responded. If we change this and they don't change their purchases by much here, so they just go, when the price went up a lot, then we know that is inelastic, right? And if it's basically a 1-for-1, then it's unitary elastic. Okay, so that's elasticity there. But then again, we can come in and we can talk about curves themselves. And I did this last week. We talk about curves themselves being elastic. Okay, so if I told you that there's this product out there and it's a very inelastic, okay, medicine, um, necessities, water, electricity tend to have very inelastic demand curves. So again, what we normally do is we just normally draw a curve like this, and we just run it at about 45-degree line. That's what we would consider a normal demand curve. Okay, in reality, they don't really look that way, but that's how we draw them in this class. because we're doing economic theory as opposed to reality. Reality is when you get into the upper econ courses. But I told you this course, this product is a very inelastic demand curve, then you draw it steeper, right? The steeper it is, the more inelastic it is. Now, even inelastic demand curves have an elastic portion, an inelastic portion, and a unitary portion, wherever the midpoint of that guy is. The midpoint would actually be pretty high up here. I guess the unitary would be way up there because of the midpoint, because of its slope, it would be pretty far up there. Okay, so even inelastic curves have elastic portions. Elastic curves, okay, an elastic curve is a flatter one, right? Oops, that's really elastic. That's good. An elastic curve will still have an inelastic portion somewhere way out here. Okay, it may be way out here, maybe way out here, but it's going to have an inelastic portion if you're calculating the elasticity coefficient. So the only ones that don't are the ones that are perfectly inelastic. Okay, if it's perfectly inelastic, then it's straight up and down. As I told you last week, that doesn't really exist. Okay, there's no product that no matter what the price, you're going to buy the same quantity. Okay, even life-saving medicine, there'll be people who would choose not to use the life-saving medicine to keep from spending all their family's money, right? You get people who are on medicine now, medicine's expensive, and they need to take a full pill every day, but that medicine's really, really expensive. But without it, they're going to get sick. But yet they'll still do things like cut it in half and only take half a pill, thinking, well, maybe I'll be okay. So they just get a little bit sick, type thing. So even things like that are that you would consider to be perfectly inelastic are not. Um, they've done all sorts of studies on different things. You can actually calculate this stuff and go back, and if you're really interested in this stuff, there's data out there on all sorts of products. Like toilet paper. Toilet paper is very inelastic. Okay, electricity is very inelastic. Vacations are more elastic. Airlines, depends on whether or not you're a leisure travel, more elastic, or a business traveler, more inelastic, right? So there's all sorts of things that do that. And go back and look at what we studied last week about what makes a curve elastic or inelastic. But where I want to go with this is I want to go with, what if we put a tax on a product? Okay. Well, who pays the share, the lion's share, or the majority of the share of the tax is based on the elasticity of that product. So what I've done here for you is I've drawn two graphs. The one on the left is more elastic. And again, you can remember that because the demand curve looks more like an E. This part right here looks more like an E. The one on the right is more inelastic because the demand curve looks more like an I, right? So you need to kind of remember that. That's kind of a tricky way to remember. I don't give a whole lot of gimmicks in class because I want you to understand it too. But when you're in a rush and you need to figure out elastic or inelastic, darn it, that's just nothing all that. So the curve on the graph is more elastic. The curve on the right is more inelastic. So if I didn't show you this and I said, okay, we're going to put a tax, we're going to put a tax on an elastic good. So the good is very elastic and we're going to put a tax on it. Well, you tell me, as a consumer, if we put a tax on it, are you going to buy a little bit less? Because remember, you're going to buy less because it's a downward sloping demand curve. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. We call that the law of demand. You learned that way back earlier in this unit, or a couple of units ago. When the price goes up because the tax raises the price, quantity demand is going to go down. So my question is, if I put a tax on an elastic good, does the percent change in quantity change a lot or a little? And the answer is it changes a lot, right? We're going to go, I'm not going to buy that then. So then the question is, who's going to be forced to pay the tax? The buyer, the most of the tax, the buyer or the seller? And the answer is that if we put a tax on an elastic good, like this one graph on the left, seller pays the majority of the tax because the buyer is just going to say, I'm not paying it. I'll just walk away. I'm not going to buy this thing. So the more elastic the product, the more the seller, pays the tax. Looking at it graphically, let's look at this one on the left here. we're at this red dot. So we've got our P's and Q's. As soon as we put a tax on it, the supply curve shifts up. That vertical distance right there is the shift up of the tax because of the tax, the supply curve, right? And then prior to the tax, we, the consumers, were paying P. Now we're paying P1. So our share of the tax, very hard to draw, this little bitty pen on this little bitty computer screen, is there. That's the consumer's share of the tax. I actually made that bigger than it actually is because it doesn't go quite that far over. There we go. That's it. That's our share. Same time, the producer was bringing in P. They way down here is how much they're paying after, or they're getting to keep after the tax. So this big old green section is their share of the tax. Why? Because it's an elastic good. Now, our consumer surplus, you and I, consumer surplus is just this little area up here. Okay. And the producer surplus is this big old area down here. But the producer surplus would have been pretty big because it was elastic to start with. Uh, well, it was big, but definitely got smaller. And notice the deadweight loss is this triangle right here. And I want you to see this. This is not a nice. Normally, when we do triangles, our students think that deadweight loss is always this pretty triangle that's like shaped like that with this. Well, that's still not even very pretty, but a triangle that's almost perfectly like that. These triangles can look like this. They can actually look like that, right? There's no guarantee that they're going to be this nice, pretty triangle like we normally see. So you got the tax is this whole area here. That included the consumer part, which I kind of basically blanked out right here, and then the producer part. Consumer surplus is this little area up here, and the producer surplus is this area down here, and then you got your good friend deadweight loss. Okay. What if you have an inelastic demand? Inelastic demand meaning we have to have it. Okay, it's a necessity. We got to have it right now. There's no substitutes, and usually it's a small proportion of our income. Doesn't have to be some. You might get one like large proportion of income, but the other three match. This is things like medicine, gasoline, fuel for our homes, things like that are very inelastic demand curves. We got to have them. We got to have them now. They usually do take a fairly high proportion of our income, but the other three make it very inelastic. The idea here, as soon as we put a tax on that, since it's inelastic, we have to have it. Who's going to pay the tax? We are. You and I are going to pay the lion's share of the majority of the tax, and that's shown here. The consumer share of the tax is here. The producer's share of the tax is just this little bitty area down here. Okay. And look at the deadweight loss. The deadweight loss is just this little bitty triangle right there. There's not much loss to society because we didn't change our quantity down here. If you look at the bottom down here, quantity, we didn't change our quantity by much. When it was elastic, we changed our quantity by a lot. And by the way, it may not look it, but the vertical distance between these supply curves, I got a ruler to measure these. This vertical distance between S and S1 for the elastic demand curve is the same as the distance between S and S1 for the inelastic demand. It's kind of an optical illusion. When I do the one in a minute, it's really going to look like that. Now, so you tell me, you're the government, and you want to put a tax on something. Okay. Which one do you tax? The elastic product or the inelastic product? And the answer is the inelastic product, because the revenue is going to be the same for the government there, but there's less quantity lost. So in fact, that actually makes the revenue larger. Okay. If they put a $2 tax on a product that's elastic, since the quantity decreases by so much, they're bringing less total revenue. Yeah, they're bringing in $2 per unit, but there's less units bought. If they put a tax on an inelastic product, the quantity here doesn't change by much. Since the quantity doesn't change by much, the government revenue is very, very high. Okay, this is why the government has very high taxes on gasoline, any oil products, cigarettes, alcohol tend to be very inelastic products for people who use those products, right? Vaping. Okay, if you are trying to vape right now, expect to be poor the rest of your life because it's going to take a higher proportion of your income because the government's going to continue to put huge taxes on it because they know that once you're hooked on it, you can't leave it. And that's all those things there. And so the government puts huge taxes. Sometimes they call them sin taxes. And the idea there is, oh, they're putting the tax on it because it's a sin. No, 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 no. That's not what the government's doing. The government's putting it, that might be what they're arguing, but they're putting a tax on it because it's high revenue grossing for them because the quantity doesn't change. And too bad, just pay it. Okay. So kind of interesting. All right. So what about this one here? Okay, what I've done here is I've changed the elasticity of the supply curve. Okay, a very elastic supply curve is something like they don't have to sell it to you right now. Cars, when the 2026 cars models come out, I don't know when that, I guess 2025 models maybe it just came out. I don't know. I'm not a car person, but when the new model cars come out, they don't have to sell it right now. But there's people that are rushing, like, oh, I want the latest model. I want the latest model. So they can charge you a much higher price. But as we get closer, let's say the 2025s are out right now. As we get closer to the release date of the 2026s, suddenly nobody wants a 2025 anymore. So they become more desperate to sell those 2025s. So what happens is that supply curve starts to shift over time from the graph on the left here, where it's fairly elastic, to the graph on the right, where it becomes more inelastic. So products like that have various elasticities. Bananas. Bananas tend to be very what? Elastic or inelastic. You're selling bananas, not buying. You're selling bananas. Very inelastic. And the reason why they're very inelastic is because you can't wait a couple of weeks to sell your bananas. When they're at the store, they need to be sold now. And so they tend to be more inelastic. The seller can't wait for changes in price. So now we're going to put a tax on a product. We put a tax on an elastic supply. Who's going to pay the most? Well, they don't have to sell it. So that means we are going to pay the majority of the tax. And if you look at it, that's exactly how it's drawn. This is our share of the tax. And this is their share of the tax. Notice we pay more. Okay. Shifting the supply curve by the exact same amount. Again, this vertical shift in the supply curve is the same graph on the right as it is on the one on the left. I actually drew them and then just shifted their axis points a little bit. Because it's inelastic, they have to pay the majority of the tax. This is our share. And this is the seller's share. They're paying a big old portion here. Deadweight loss is this big old triangle here. Okay. And over here, deadweight loss is this little bitty triangle right there. Now, again, I don't know what I was going to say. Okay, so that's elasticity and how it deals with taxes. I think if you understand it more, okay, if it's elastic, whoever's supply or demand curve is elastic, that's the one's going to pay the majority of the tax. So an elastic demand, buyers pay the majority of the tax. An elastic supply, sellers pay the majority of the tax. Then I always have a student says, what if they're both elastic? Then we go back to basically like a 45-degree line, even though they're both very, very flat. We don't really know who pays the most because we don't know which one is more elastic. So if I had a very elastic supply and a very elastic demand, we can't tell you who's going to pay the majority of the tax without drawing it. But since I drew them and they have about the same elasticity, then it looks like it's going to be split 50-50 here. Okay, so that's elasticity. I've got 14 minutes. I'm going to go and start the next unit. I've got about 14 minutes here. And the more I can get ahead, because there are, believe it or not, a few people that are already up with me. I know some of y'all are probably watching this, and today's February the 5th. You may be watching this, in March. By the time you get to that unit, that's fine. I get that. But there are some people that are up with me right now because they want to get this course done quicker than others. So, all right. So we're entering now the next unit, and everything we've done up to this point now all the supply and demand stuff and all the production possibility curves and scarcity and opportunity costs and all that sort of stuff. Everything we've done up to this point is really just building to get to the main thrust of this course. The main thrust of this course is perfect competition, monopolies, something called oligopolies, which you may or may not have heard of, and monopolistic competitors and their output and pricing strategies. Okay, that's where we're going to get to. We're going to find out, why do economists consider monopolies to be so bad? Okay, why are monopolies illegal? Okay, and the answer that everyone always says, oh, because they can charge whatever price they want. Not true. They can't charge whatever price they want. We'll learn about that. That's coming up. But in order to understand all this stuff, we have to understand cost curves. And that's what this next unit is all about. TAC, this next unit is all about cost curves. So let me run through some definitional stuff to start with, and then I'm going to stop because we don't have to get as far along today, because I can pick this up next week. But so when we introduce this unit, we want to start understand a little bit about things. Business's goal is not to sell as many units of the product as they can sell. Okay, their goal is not their goal is not number sold. Okay, a car dealership does not necessarily want to sell more cars. And I know you're thinking that doesn't make sense. It does. You'll find out why in a minute. Okay, that's not their goal. Okay, their goal is not to max out their total revenue, the total money coming in their cash register. That's not their goal. They're not trying to bring as much revenue as they can possibly bring in. Their goal is actually to max out profit, max their profit. And that's why the number sold may not be their goal. If I'm a car dealership and I own a car dealership and I want to sell more cars, well, let me get more people to come in there and sell the cars. The more people I can have them standing out in the street. I can have 20 car dealers out there. Come on, buy a car. Come on, buy a car. And the more people I have, the more likely I am to snag a customer. The problem is, what happens when I have to hire all those people to sell cars? I got to pay them a salary, right? So selling more costs more. They got to take into account cost. You've got to take into account the cost of selling more. If I want to sell even more cars, I got to build a bigger dealership. Well, that costs money to buy a bigger dealership. I got to have a bigger inventory. Well, that costs money. So maybe I don't want to have quite as many cars on my lot. Maybe I don't want to have quite as big of a lot, and I'll sell less cars, right? But I'll get a greater profit because my costs are lower. Because profit includes the revenue and the cost, which is another reason why they don't want to max out total revenue. They don't want to max out total revenue because in order to max out total revenue, that means more sales, which could also mean more cost. So firms care about revenue, but they're not looking at revenue and they're not looking at number sold. Their total goal is to maximize their profit. And that's the key for the rest of the semester, is maximization of profit. Well, for the next, till the last about 3-4 weeks. Okay. So when you're looking at this, there's different types of profit. Okay. And in order to understand different types of profit, you need to understand there's different types of costs associated here. Okay. The first one is, when we talk about economic costs, that's basically the same thing as opportunity cost. Okay. So an economic cost, and we'll often call these also implicit costs. So these two are saying the same thing. There's just different words. An economic cost or an implicit cost is an opportunity cost. It's what you give up. If you don't remember opportunity cost earlier, an opportunity cost is what you give up to do something else. So for example, by me being a teacher, my opportunity cost is I can't have Pet Mickey's Pizza Palace and sell pizza, right? If I say, hey, I want to quit teaching and open up a pizza place, my opportunity cost is the income that I would have derived from being a teacher, right? So there's always an opportunity cost in life. Everything you do is an opportunity cost. Okay. So the implicit cost is just that. It's your opportunity cost. Same thing as an economic cost. An explicit cost is anything you pay others. So this would be like your rent or your wages. This is anything you're paying to others. This would be your input costs. So like if you want, if I open up Pet Mickey's Pet Mickey's Pizza Palace, I have to buy flour, right? And that would be an input cost. So all those are paying to other people. It's not my opportunity cost. So when you start to look at that, what we want to then do is we want to go in and look at this concept of what we call a normal profit versus an economic profit versus what we're going to see in a minute, an economic loss. Okay, so a normal profit in economics, we have two names for this. We have normal profit and we have zero economic profit. Okay, and the reason why economists do this, they always have multiple names for everything. So we want to make it really hard for you to learn. We want to the goal is just to make your life miserable and to come up with as many different names of things as we can, right? That's what I thought when I was a student learning this. Okay. Truthfully, it's because over time, um, different economists have from different countries and different schools and different ways of thinking have kind of used different terminology. And as it becomes more and more adapted, then you have to know both of them. So you'll hear me say zero economic profit, or you hear me say they're earning a normal profit. They're the same thing. Zero economic profit and normal profit are the same thing. And normal meaning that's what a competitor would earn. We'll find out that later on. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Don't get frustrated with all the terminology in the course. There's a lot of them like this where there's more than one name for things. Anyways, there we go. All right, so let me show you this example. So this first one here, this company's total revenue is 200,000. So again, total revenue is the price that they're charging. It's the price that they're charging times the number of units that they sell. Okay, and I'm not going to put numbers for price and quantity on here. We don't need to. That's their total revenue. At the same time, their explicit costs, the cost that they are paying to others, is $100,000. Okay, but their implicit costs are also 100,000. I just made these numbers up to make this. I could have made this one 110 and this one 90. Still works out the same, but I shouldn't make them the same. But anyways, they are. So we're paying $100,000 to others. My implicit cost is the cost that I am giving up to do this job. So say this is Pet Mickey's Pizza Palace, and by having Pet Mickey's Pizza Palace, I'm giving up the ability to be a teacher. Let's say I'm making $100,000 as a teacher, right? Then that means what's going on here is I'm bringing $200,000 in. I'm giving $100,000 to others. My implicit cost is 100,000. So my economic profit is actually zero. I'm doing just as good here as if I'd stayed in my next best alternative. In my next best alternative, I would have had $100,000 coming in, right? But I would have given up the ability to make this money over here as a teacher. So I'm doing just as well here as I could my next best alternative. I want to make sure that I am going to have accounting profits in here. So I'm going to go ahead and cover that right now. Hit accounting profit now. It comes up 2 slides later. Let me go ahead and hit it now because it actually fits in here. So the economist is going to say you earned zero economic profit or a normal profit. They're earning zero economic profit or a normal profit. The accountants don't consider opportunity costs. So the accountant is going to look at this and say, hey, wow, your total revenue was $100,000. Your explicit costs were, your total revenue is $200,000. Your explicit costs were $100,000. Congratulations, you made $100,000 this year. So the accountant is going to say that you made $100,000 and they're going to be all happy for you. But you're thinking, well, I made $100,000 in my old job. I'm not any better off, right? That's the way economists think. Economists always take into account opportunity cost. The accountant is saying I made actually zero economic profit, right? Now, let me show you another example here. All right, let's take a look at this one here. Total revenue is 200,000. Explicit costs are 90,000. So I'm paying 90,000 to other people. My opportunity cost is still 100,000. That means I made a $10,000 economic profit. I made $10,000 more than my next best alternative. Okay. I'm not earning a zero economic profit or a normal profit. So quickly see if you can figure out what the accountant will say. Now it will say you made $200,000. You paid explicit to others. It exits you, it exits the firm, others 90,000. And they're saying, congratulations, you made $110,000 in accounting profit. Again, you're thinking, well, 110, really, I would have made 100 in my other job. So I'm only $10,000 better. But hey, you're $10,000 better. That's what we call an economic profit. All right. So anyway, so economic profit is not the same as accounting profit. This goes into a why. The EK that the College Board says is accounting profit fails to account for implicit costs, such as the cost of financial capital, borrowing money, compensation for risk, giving up, it's risky starting your own business, or the entrepreneur's time. In other words, these are all opportunity costs. These are all things that you could have done otherwise. The cost of money, you could have used that money for something else. Anyways, so that's the accountants, the entrepreneur, accounting versus economic profit. Okay, let me run through a couple more definitions. We're not going to get any actual cost curves today, which is great. We can start them next week. Short run and long run. Okay, we're going to talk a lot in this class about in the short run or in the long run. In the short run, then what you've got is in the short run, you've got variable costs, things that vary with production, like electricity, wages, things like that. If I'm producing 0 units, I have 0 electric bill and I have 0 units. I mean, 0 wages. You don't have to pay any workers anything, right? That all sorts of variable costs. And you also have fixed cost. A fixed cost is a cost that stays the same no matter what, like rent. Rent is a fixed cost. So in the short run, you have both variable and fixed. In the long run, everything is variable. Okay, you have no fixed cost in the long run. Okay, so let's suppose you're at your home school, and your home school has 50 classrooms. Okay, they have to hire teachers, say 50 teachers. They have to run the electricity. They have to do all that, right? They're going to be limited on how many students they can service. So what could they do in the long run? In the long run, they can take this and they can come in and they can build a second addition. In my old school, they built a second floor on one. They built a 2-story building right next to one. Okay, they can build an addition that holds another 50 classrooms. In the short run, they can't do anything about it. In the long run, they can build a new addition. The question I get asked when I use this example in class is, what about when these schools bring trailers in? My argument is a trailer is a fixed cost. That would then be considered long run. Is it what they want? No, it's not what they want. They want to have everybody inside the building. They want people in trailers. But in the long run, those trailers appear, and now we can service more students. So there's no cut and dry. Well, this is short run. This is long run. The idea is in the long run, all resources are variable. Okay, that's the key. In the long run, all resources are variable. All right, I'm going to stop here. I don't want to get into diminishing marginal returns until next week. I'm going to pick this up right here, and I will do the rest of production costs next week. Hope everybody has a fabulous week. If you have any questions, give me a call, or not give me a call, send me an email, and I'll be glad to help you. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to stop recording. Everybody have a good evening.